to you by the Ad Council and the U.S. Forest Service.
My teacher said that we should have a plan in case of an emergency. Do we have one?
First thing I'm going to do is grab a flashlight with dead batteries.
I'm going to start randomly throwing clothes in the bag. You two will be hiding in the closet and Dad won't be able to find you.
And that's when we both start crying.
Uncontrollably. Can you pass the cutlets?
Winging it is not an emergency plan. Make sure your kids know what to do during an emergency, who to call, where to meet, what to pack. Search Ready Kids at nyc.gov or call 311. Brought to you by the New York City Office of Emergency Management and the Ad Council.
Wherever we go, we about to bring on the positive vibe. Wherever we go, we are gonna do what makes us feel right.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to another episode of Purpose Show. And you will note that I have an empty chair by me. So I am in this captain seat, driving, riding, flying this plane by myself. I'm excited. You know, when I was preparing for this show, I looked through kind of all of our previous episodes, and we've been doing this, y'all, since April. And this is our 19th show, right? So many of you all have been with us since the beginning. And so we are so excited that you all carve out a few hours on your Saturday mornings to be a part of our Soul Purpose family. Our goal when we started this was to empower, engage, enlighten, and educate our community about things that we thought were important and things that we thought and hoped that other people thought were important. And so you all have been along with us on this ride. And so we are extremely, extremely grateful. So that said, I hope that this week's show is similarly as engaging, because it is something that I am super excited about. And it's a topic that I think for us to discuss, and that is the role of the Black prosecutor. And so for y'all who watch the show pretty regularly, you know that I love politics. And this is not necessarily a political show, and so we won't be talking about politics, but a lot of our prosecutors are elected positions. And so I know that one of the reasons why I wanted to do this show was during the primary season. Senator Kamala Harris, as many of you all know, is a lifelong prosecutor. Before she took her Senate seat, was the Attorney General for the state of California and was a district attorney in San Francisco. So she's a lifelong prosecutor. And one of the things that struck me was the amount that was hurled at her during the primary season. And the vitriol was strange to me because as a lawyer, I understand the role of a prosecutor and how important it is that we have Black prosecutors. But the vitriol to me was uneven because Senator Klobuchar is also a prosecutor, but there was nothing said about her. And so I questioned whether or not, is it because they have angst against her because she's a prosecutor? Is it because she's a Black prosecutor, or is it because she's a Black female prosecutor, right? So you have that intersection. So at any rate, I just thought it was so interesting that just the level of hate that was hurled towards her just really struck me as a Black lawyer. And so then I said, let's have a conversation. And I don't practice criminal law. I stay in my lane. So let's invite some people who do practice criminal law. And so I am so excited about this panel. I cannot tell you, y'all know I get excited easily, and my husband has to tap me on my leg and tell me to calm down, but I'm super pumped about this one. And so I'm not going to talk anymore. I want to bring my guests in. We have Shauna Hale, who's a federal prosecutor, Michele Rayner, who everybody knows is a phenomenal civil rights attorney and a criminal defense attorney. And we have history makers on the panel. We have Aramis Ayala, who was elected, I think, 2016 as the first African-American woman, first African-American period, but specifically first African-American elected as a state attorney in the state of Florida. And she's over in the Ninth Circuit representing Osceola and Orange County. And then we have another history maker, Mr. Pryor, who, although he has an election coming up in November, because we're going to claim it in the name of Jesus, when he gets elected in November, will be the first African-American man to be elected as state attorney in the state of Florida. So God is good. We got history. And Michele actually just was running for House District 70 for the Florida House and won her race this week. And she is a history maker as well. And she will be the first, correct me if I'm wrong, Michele, first openly queer woman to sit in the House. Black woman in the Florida House.
To ever be elected in the state of Florida.
Oh, period.
And then the first woman to hold District 70.
What? Listen, Shauna, you a history maker too. We're gonna figure out during this conversation how you touching history as well. But I am so blessed to have y'all on. So how are y'all doing?
Tired.
Yes. Tired. Exhausted.
Carol and I are like, hey, how are you?
Great. So we're just gonna jump right into this conversation. We talked a lot about, before the show, we had just a really good conversation about the role of the Black prosecutor. And it's always intrigued me because I, as a lawyer, understand why they're necessary. But we know that the Black community is deeply distrustful of the criminal justice system, right? So whether it's law enforcement, whether it's the judiciary, whatever it is, there's a deeply rooted distrust. If you understand the history of law enforcement in this country relative to Black people, you kind of understand the why. And so Black prosecutors are seen as an extension of that. And so there's some question about whether or not Black prosecutors are there seeking justice, or as the flyer says, they're seeking the perpetuation of just us. And for those of you all who know me, when I say just us, I'm talking about a criminal justice system that disparately impacts Black, brown, and poor people and tends to be much more lenient for those folks who don't fit into those categories. Prime example, most recent, mispronounce her name. Lori Loughlin was recently sentenced. If you remember her, she's an actress, California, paid like $500,000 for folks to lie, for her children to lie on their application to USC. Her and her husband denied it for but almost a year, and decided to plead guilty. She got 2 months. Whereas just 2 months for lying to ensure that her children got a better education. On the flip side, you have a sister, Kelly William Bolar, I think, did the same thing, put the wrong address when she was enrolling her child in school, again for a better education, and got 3 years. So there's that disparate treatment of Black folks in the Black community relative to the criminal justice system. But why? And so, Michele, I want to start with you because I know that you are a civil rights lawyer. This is your space in terms of being a spokesperson for the people. Why do you feel there is such a distrust of the criminal justice system as a whole? And then we can narrow it down to Black prosecutors.
Well, doggone, Monica, you want me to just
listen? We dive in. We dive in here.
Well, wow. Okay. Well, but no. First, Monica, thanks so much for having all of us here. I'm really excited that you would think of me to invite me here in this space. I think that I always kind of like to take the historical standpoint. Even when we think of law enforcement, we understand that law enforcement, modern police force, they were actually slave catchers, right? So if your foundation of your relationship with law enforcement is that they're trying to catch you to enslave you, that at that level, there's going to be a psychological place of distrust with Black and brown folks, right? And then as you start to go into the criminal justice system, historically, Black and brown folks and poor people have been, more harshly treated, more harshly sentenced. And so I don't think that any of us who are sitting here would disagree with that point. But I think that what we have to do is that, and I'm glad that you're having this show, is that we, I love that, and then correct me if I'm wrong because I've never been a prosecutor, but I believe the mission is to seek justice, to do justice, right? And so what does that look like for Black and brown folks? What does that look like for poor people? And when we think about even crime, so I think about, State Attorney Ayala, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe you and State Attorney Warren have done this, started to decriminalize things like marijuana, because we understand how the disparate impact that it has on Black and brown folks in the community. I mean, the level of distrust, I mean, like Monica, like you just asked me like this like question that is just, I'm like, for example, this is the best example I have. I was sitting at a forum with State Attorney Bernie McCabe in the Black community. And someone asked him, Bernie McCabe, if you don't know, has been the elected state attorney. I'm 38 years old. He has probably been the elected state attorney for 27 to 28 of my 38 years in Pinellas County. That's a long time. When they asked him, do you believe in implicit bias? No, I don't believe in implicit bias. I don't think anyone has that. Okay. Well, do you keep numbers on the individuals of Black kids who are direct filed? No, I don't do that. Why would I keep numbers on that? And then he says to a room full of Black people, well, I don't go out there and get them. Y'all do the crimes and bring them to me. This is the elected state attorney for Pinellas and Pasco County. In the south, on the south side of St. Pete, in a room full of Black folks. That doesn't engender a lot of trust. Yeah. That doesn't engender there's going to be a lot of fairness. And when I literally had to stand up in a courtroom, probably in June, because we were still going to court in June, and I had a client who he pawned something for his friend. He's 18 years old. He didn't realize it was stolen. He had played the game at his friend's house, never been in trouble, having a football scholarship. And it was a dealing in stolen property and false verification. So one's a second degree felony, one's a third degree felony. I said, hey, listen, make this second a third degree. Let's get him in PTI. Let's get this past him. No, I'm not going to do that. Da, 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 da. My client dreads, but tremendous kid. And I just stood up and I said, well, it's really interesting, because if my client looked differently, I can assure you that the state would probably be bending over backwards to make sure that we could get past this. And then all of a sudden the next court day I hear, okay, Ms. Rayner, we're going to amend the charge and but I shouldn't have to go through all that. Yeah. I shouldn't have to do all of that. Yeah. And so when you have an office that is ran like what Bernie McCabe said, how can you expect that there's going to be trust? Yeah, with the Black community, and with regard to our people treated fairly and justly in the criminal justice system. And so that's just my experiences. Yeah. So I want to kick it to either Aramis or Harold or Shauna. Y'all jump in here. I asked a loaded question because I knew I was going to get the energy I got back. But because there is such distrust, you all are the prosecutors. How do you combat that? Because I think the feelings are legitimate, they're real, right? Because we've all experienced, I know, Aramis, you had a personal situation when you first got elected, right? So how do you all combat that perception about the criminal justice system and its disenfranchisement and systematic oppression and racism, because I'm going to be just real, as it relates to Black and brown people? How do you counter that when you're sitting on the other side of the table?
So I want to start off.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm jumping in, right? So I want to start off by, again, thank you for having this platform, but somewhat piggybacking off what Michele was saying. And I need to let it be known that I recognize that there is implicit bias. I recognize that there's systemic racism. And I don't think that is where we have to start, on ground zero with truth, because people begin to trust you when you speak truth. And one of the truths that prosecutors have to deal with is this split dichotomy between justice and the law. Right? A prosecutor's responsibility is to enforce the law. A prosecutor's other responsibility is to pursue justice. And for so many years, where people who did not look like me, think like me, and experience what I experienced, they have limited justice and the law aligning, despite the history that our laws have a history of being unjust based upon who can get married, who can get health care, whether or not we kill children, whether or not we kill disabled people, all of the injustices that we've been able to overcome we realize that law and justice don't always align. So as Black prosecutors, we've got to start at ground zero, having the conversation that, you know what, this law is not just. And I stand and I said what I said, death penalty is not justice. I talk about felony murder is not justice. All of the things that we have to enforce as prosecutors, we have to acknowledge the damage that it is doing. We have to acknowledge the systemic issues and the racial history behind it, understanding we've still got to do our job because there's violence in our communities. We're trying to protect people, but the key is to acknowledge the truth. And sometimes those truths hurt, but in discussing the truth, we also have to give a remedy. And the remedy is the change in the laws. So I would say truth followed by a remedy is how we begin to build trust.
Shauna or Hale, anyone y'all want to jump in?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I agree with everything that Ms. Ayala and Ms. Rayner said in terms of we have to first acknowledge that there is a problem. This skin that I am in is the skin that I'm in. I don't get to take this off whether or not I'm in the courtroom or whether or not I'm in the car or whether or not I'm at the Target. So we certainly have to start with saying, yes, there is a problem as prosecutors generally. As Black prosecutors specifically, though, I think that part of our job is representing our victims who oftentimes look like us. That's really one of the most important parts of our job, because most crimes, as Ms. Ayala said, there's violence in our community. That violence is generally racially homogenous. So if you have a Black defendant, most likely you're going to have a Black victim. So part of my job and part of my sort of mechanism for instilling trust in the community for this system is being there for my victims and advocating for those Black and brown girls that are oftentimes left out, are oftentimes not protected. So protecting our victims, telling the truth. And listen, sometimes it comes down to putting people in jail. And there are times when jail is required, not only because of the law, but because of the nature and the circumstance of the offense. But there are also times when jail is not required. So using our discretion based on our lived experiences and based on what we know about how this system works. So using our judgment in a prudent and reasonable manner, taking into consideration all of the circumstances that may have led someone to our doorstep is also very, very important. But ultimately, our job is, as Ms. Rayner and Ms. Ayala said, is to do justice, seek justice, and to protect the community. That is my job.
Okay. Harold, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, and I'll be quick. I mean, Miss Ayala, Shauna, and Michelle, you all hit the nail on the head. And so I just want to add to the point. I truly believe in what I've said, and the reason why I got into this arena and to be a prosecutor was that if you're going to serve as a state attorney or a law enforcement officer or sheriff of any circuit, you have to acknowledge that the criminal justice system has been fundamentally stacked against people of color and poor folk. If you don't understand that, you have no business being in those positions. To go to Michelle's point, I grew up in the 6th Judicial Circuit. I actually grew up in Pasco County. And it appalls me to have a state attorney in that office. You can't be a state attorney and say that there's no implicit or racial bias. That's the nice way of saying that there's racism, right? Rather than outright saying that there is racism in the criminal justice system. We have to acknowledge, and we have to take the wool from over our eyes and acknowledge that we have an American system, from economics, from education to the criminal justice system, where racism has been socially ingrained in the very fabric of those institutions. And they affect how we live, how we develop in this country and move through these institutions, whether it be outwardly, right? Or whether it be subconsciously, right? And so that's why it's truly important that we have state attorneys, not only just Black and white folk, but we need state attorneys that actually can understand the communities that they serve. And I think that's a fundamental thing. And that's why I became a prosecutor. Growing up in Dade City, where I saw drugs, I saw crime. I have family members who've been in and out of the criminal justice system, family members who were murdered. and seeing the how the justice system is inequitable. If you're a Black victim, it treats you less than as a victim because of the color of your skin or your zip code or your socioeconomic status. Or in case of some of my family members, they were drug addicts or they had mental health issues, so they were less than. We need state attorneys that can empathize and look at these particular cases, look at those circumstances, and advocate and zealously prosecute those cases on behalf of Black and brown victims, people with mental health issues, people with drug addiction issues, just as the person that lives on the other side of the tracks. And so I think Ms. Ayala brought the point up of justice. Justice is important. I've always said this, that sometimes justice is a not guilty verdict. Mm-hmm. Sometimes justice is us deciding not to file charges, not to bring those charges. And sometimes justice is filing an old process. Someone asked me when I was a prosecutor, I would stand at the podium and I'd announce an old process and I'd have a big smile on my face. And they're like, why are you smiling? You're a prosecutor. I was like, hey, justice was served. The right thing was done. This brother, he wasn't a person, and I'm proud to announce it. And so we need prosecutors who are okay with going to sleep, as my daddy would say, on the cool side of the pillow, going there to do the right thing. If you're seeking truth, if you're seeking justice, you as a Black man, you as a Black woman, you can be proud of the job that you do as a prosecutor, because you know you're not oppressing the people, you know you're protecting your communities, and every day you are seeking to do the right thing. And I think that's the key.
I see. Can I jump in real quick? November. Oh, wait a minute. Wait, hold on. When you get a bunch of lawyers together, everybody got something. Okay, I thought Aramis, then Shauna, then Michele. Aramis.
I just want us to be very real. Prosecutors do damage. So let's not act like it's this novel idea that Senator Harris, that myself, that Harold in the future, that others, we're going to do damage because we are become part of a system that is historically going to cause damage. It was created to cause damage. So when you get in the system and you're trying to undo it, it's no different than driving a car, going over over one of the parking bumps, and then you got to figure out how you're going to get it back. You're going to tear the car up a little bit more, but let's put it in a better position so that it can be readjusted. Let's not act like prosecutors are the issue. It is the system. So when you identify prosecutors who understand that our system is a machine, but us who are trying to change it, we are committed to the casualties and trying to undo the casualties of the machine rather than just being the manager of the machine. And that, I think you can start analyzing people who say they want to be a prosecutor. What are you more committed to, this machine or the casualties?
Shauna?
So to sort of counter a little bit that point, prosecutors also do a tremendous good in the community. And part of that good is like what Harold said, at every step, we should be evaluating what is the right thing to do. When I've interviewed folks coming into my office, I've made the point that sometimes it's hard to do the right thing. When I was a state prosecutor, I had a defendant who molested his daughter and his niece. They were both under the age of 8 years old. I knew he was guilty, but you know what? I didn't want to put those girls through it. They refused to testify. So then I have to evaluate. I know this guy is guilty. Can I prove my case? There is a tremendous injustice done to these little girls. They have been victimized. What do I do? And it's the prosecutor's job to start justice. As much as defense attorneys do, their job starts after our job.
Hands down.
Our job is the first step in justice, whether it's for the victim or sometimes the defendant. Like Mr. Pryor said, sometimes a null process is the best thing that can happen to a case, because if we're doing the right thing and it's our job to prove the case, then if we can't do it, then we can't go forward. However, if we have the facts, the evidence, and the law on our side, it is our obligation to go forward on cases. And that is the good that we do for the community. We take people out of the community who harm the community. We protect the vulnerable. We protect those folks, those little girls. I didn't convict that daddy of sexual battery, child under 12, where he received a life sentence, but I convicted him of child abuse, and I got him on sex offender sanctions because I had to weigh the damage this was going to do to these girls and what the most good I could get out of this. So he's not on a registry, but he got counseling and he's got a conviction for child abuse because he did it. And I got those girls protection until at least they were able to take care of themselves. So it's not black and white. There are often competing interests. Ultimately, the interest is doing the right thing, even when it's hard.
Yeah.
Michele?
So as a defense attorney, it does my heart good to hear y'all say these things, right? And I'm like, oh, this is great. This is like what we need. And then I realize that every day, my experience with many prosecutors, I'm not gonna say all of them, because I have best friends who are prosecutors, and we are fierce opponents, and but they're reasonable and we're able to, talk, but there's a good amount that don't feel the way that y'all feel, right?
In my office, there are. I'm with you.
right, that don't feel the way you feel. It's either a power trip or it's either because I can. I've been told that by a prosecutor because I can, and I've had to say, okay, Lord, let's not go all the way in on this prosecutor, and and not understanding that really that when you are in the role as an assistant state attorney or as a state attorney, you are the most powerful person in that quorum, especially in state court. You are the most powerful person in circuit court, felony court. You are the most powerful person in that courtroom. And so I think that one of the things that is so important to me, I want young prosecutors, being a criminal defense attorney. I started my career as an assistant public defender with Julianne Holt. So y'all already know, if y'all from Tampa, you know that I know how to try cases because Ms. Holt does not play a game, right? So knowing that the power that you have, and understanding with that power, to Shauna's point, that it is to do justice, that it is to make sure that you protect, but then also to Harold's point, that if there's a no process that needs to happen, if there's a no file that needs to happen, or if there's a reasonable plea that needs to happen, that needs to happen as well. I shouldn't have to go in there and show my behind and, take you to trial a couple times and win for you to say, okay, Michele, what do you want me to do? And that's the talk that we have in the criminal defense bar. Well, just go to trial a couple times and win, and then they'll kind of realize that you're not playing, and then it should, and I don't mind it because I do that, but why does it have to be that way?
Yeah.
Why does my client's life have to be, well, listen, we're facing 30 years. Let's see what, it's 30 years or it's this or it. I guess maybe it's so simple. Just do what's right. Just do what's right. I told someone a few weeks ago. I said, listen, if you want to charge my client, that's fine. Give me the information that I need. Don't withhold discovery from me. Just do what you're supposed to do. And whatever happens, happens. And I'll do my job, you'll do your job, and we're done. And so the prosecutors that I love and respect the most are the ones that are just, hey, Michele, this is what it is. We do our job. So, I mean, I love to hear this, but I'm like, how do we make this like an overall thing?
And so, I think part of that is recruiting more Black and brown people to these jobs. My office in the Middle District of Florida has an opening for anybody watching for criminal AUSA in Jacksonville. If anybody is interested. No lie, me and my friends have been like, okay, so who do we know who might be interested in a criminal AUSA position in Jacksonville?
I actually know someone.
Okay, well, good. Well, so we can talk afterwards. Yes. The point is that for whatever reason, people like Mr. Pryor and Mr. Ayala, in my district, in the Middle District of Florida, which is 35 of the 67 counties in the state of Florida, which include Tampa, Orlando, and Jacksonville, we have 8 federal Black prosecutors.
Yeah.
8. So part of that is the system, us not doing a good job of reaching out, but it's also me, like when I do reach out and when we do say, hey, who wants anybody interested in this? It seems that a lot of us don't want this job, which I think is a loss. We are needed in the community. We are needed in the courtroom. Judges need to see us. It's very, very important that judges need to see us and the community needs to see us in the courtroom.
So hold that, Aramis, because we have to go to a break, but I do want you to jump in and respond to that when we come back. This is such a fabulous conversation. I'm so happy that we did this. So we're gonna go to a break. This is a phenomenal conversation. We are having a discussion about the role of Black prosecutors. We're gonna hit this break. You are watching In Touch News Radio.
Wherever we go, we are gonna do what makes.
We're playing your favorite old school. Today's R&B. With a smooth touch of jazz. You're listening to In Touch Radio.
The Storks are bringing me a baby brother. We can do this together.
All right, let's go. Storks know how to keep kids safe. Do you? What?
Oh my gosh, you don't know.
I know.
You don't.
Oh man, you laugh when you're uncomfortable.
No. Making sure your child is in the right car seat is one of the steps to safer travel.
I will rock this.
You will rock this. To know for sure that your child is in the right car seat for their age and size, visit safercar.gov/the right seat. Cool. Very cool. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
It's important to plan ahead for emergencies, like the storm. When it kicked in, we had a plan. We were able to get in touch with each other in no time.
How to find each other.
The whole experience was
the
fine.
most frightening 10 hours of my life.
If there's one piece of advice I'd offer other moms out there, it's to stay calm and keep to the plan.
Message.
Some parents plan ahead, some don't. Make sure you know where to find your family in an emergency. Start your plan at ready.gov. Brought to you by FEMA and the Ad Council.
By now, we're all aware of the dangers of COVID-19. Like others with existing health issues, cancer patients are at a high risk due to their compromised condition. If you are newly diagnosed with cancer, your care likely can't wait. Moffitt Cancer Center is the best place for your cancer concerns and to provide guidance to help you plan your next steps. We're here for you. Call 1-888-456-2839 or go to moffitt.org/here-for-you.
Wherever we go, we about to bring on the positive vibe. Wherever we go.
We are back from our break. And before the break, Shauna had provided phenomenal insight. And I know Aramis wanted to jump in. So go ahead, Aramis.
Thank you. I think what Shauna is saying is so real, right? Like we have people who just don't want to be prosecutors, in that we have got to be mindful that this is a process. You know, so many times we live in this microwave community that, I mean, this country is built on oppression. It is built on, what this prosecutor, this criminal justice system is. And a show up of me for 4 years or someone else for 8 years is not going to change decades and centuries of injustice. So part of this first step is changing the face and heart of prosecution. So let's not try and have an expectation that is unrealistic. Every time someone asks me what I want my legacy to be, I always say redefining what justice is, right? Mm-hmm. We have got to redefine what justice looks like without the dominant white male image. It's got to look different. It's got to, I tell people all the time, don't be shocked that I'm different. Like, you expect me to come up here, go through everything and just promote the status quo? Like, I'm not just a little pepper flake. I really want something to be different. So I want us to be mindful, and we have got to be patient with the process and understand that it is a lonely place here. It is constantly hitting against us, and we are at the stage of redefining justice. And once that takes hold, then people can begin to desire it as a profession, and then they will want to become a part of the profession. And when you bring those hearts, then you get a cycle of change. And when you change the desire, you change the outcome.
And so, go ahead, Michele.
I want to say to Aramis's point and Shauna's point, when I actually have especially young Black women that come to me who are interested in criminal defense, and I know that they are about justice, I actually tell them to go be a prosecutor.
I said,
go be a prosecutor.
Yeah.
But you have to tell them to understand that they're getting the experience and they're going to do some stuff that is uncomfortable. That's what I'm saying earlier, that I know we do good, but you are going to cause some harm. You're going to be uncomfortable, but you're going to be a valuable asset to this system once you get there, and you can then do and push a different agenda.
And I Harold, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just real quick. When I took trial advocacy, we all took trial advocacy in law school. And my trial advocacy professor was Chuck Morton. He was the first African American to be a prosecutor in South Florida. The guy that I'm taking over for, or I plan to take over for, he was his first hire, and he was a Black man. And Chuck Morton was my trial ad professor, and I booked his class. And he walked up to me and said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I want to be a public defender." And it took him, a state attorney, the first in South Florida, to say, "No, brother, I understand you can do a lot of great, but I need more people that look like me on this side. You should consider." And so we need more of us to actually actively go out and recruit, seek, and retain and cultivate. I truly believe more Black female state attorneys. We need more Black male state attorneys and more members from the LGBTQ plus community, because that's it's always been a thriving community in South Florida, and especially in Broward County, and they're underrepresented. And so we need to have a state attorney's office that reflects the communities that they serve, and we need to actively seek these people. I served as an in-house counsel for a multi-million-dollar telecommunications company. If you had an issue or a technological issue and you wanted the biggest and brightest minds in your company, you hired headhunters, or you created a team and you actively sought those people. And so we have to start being aggressive as state attorneys to actually do that, allocating funds within our budget, or trying to do something to actually go to HBCUs, go to these colleges and bring them here. And that's my plan. I know that's my plan. And I know it's a lot of other progressive minded or progressive thinking state attorneys around the country's goals to do.
So I want to do a shameless plug. Chuck Morton, I actually call him Uncle Chuck. He was my father's law school classmate at University of Florida. So very, very small world. He is not Gators. He's not seen me in a very long time, so I probably age him.
Go Gators.
Okay. So Harold brings up, y'all are bringing up a really good point in terms of, because we talked about this before the show, about the lack of diversity in that prosecution space, right? And so I will say, full transparency, when I was in law school, my mindset was I wasn't really interested in criminal law, but I said if I did decide to go that route, I would have a very difficult time as a young lawyer advocating on behalf of a state that I know fundamentally is not created or designed to benefit Black, brown, and poor people. And so because of my foundation, I knew that was going to be challenging and difficult for me. As I've grown, which is interesting because once I graduated, I represent management in companies and have done that for the last 20 years. And I advise clients on how to fire people. But I will say that in that space, because I'm a Black woman, there is an insight and a lot lived experience that I have that allows me, because in my world, I control that. I control who gets fired. I control whether or not you terminate, discipline someone, or at least provide guidance in that space. But my lived experience allows me to advise better, I think. And so
can I, Monica? I just have to. Every person who's elected, the only position you have to have is an executive director, and having a Black female executive director, shout out Camila Perry, is the strongest thing that I had. The advice and counsel that I've received from her, I rely on, I live by. So the work that you all do may seem like it's kind of, out there and not necessarily in the system, but she has given me the foundation to be what I am as a state attorney. And I thank you all for that work, specifically thanking her.
Yeah. Shauna?
I was going to say to your point about, not wanting to advocate on behalf of the state. When I was a state prosecutor, I stood up and said, Shauna Hale for the state of Florida. Now I stand up in courtrooms actually all over the country at this point and say, Shauna Hale on behalf of the United States of America. But who I'm advocating for, what I'm advocating for is for the community. Prosecutors are the people who stop the daddy from sneaking down the hallway at 2:00 in the morning into their little girls' bedrooms. Prosecutors are the people who when a boat is intercepted in the middle of the Pacific Ocean from stopping those 2,500 kilos of cocaine from reaching American soil. That is my job. And while I represent the United States of America, I am advocating every single day for my community.
That's good. But so that's phenomenal. One of the things that I wanted to say was with respect to ensuring that we have a more diverse group of folks on the prosecution side. What I look at are two cases. I look at, and I'm from West Palm Beach, so the Corey Jones murder case, and I look at the Trayvon Martin murder case, right? Because I'm not going to give the defendants in those cases any time on my show. We're going to talk about the victims. And so I recognize that as a prosecutor, one of your roles, you are representing, but you're advocating on behalf of victims. And so I think for me, there was a very distinct difference in terms of the outcome, because with the Corey Jones case, you had two phenomenal Black prosecutors prosecuting on behalf of Corey Jones, who could not speak, right? I'm going to ignore those little signs, but because my colors say enough. But you had two phenomenal Black women who were advocating on behalf and were the voice for Corey Jones in that courtroom. Because the tendency is, and my husband's here, he told me to stop talking, but I'm going to say this. The tendency is when we are the victims, that we have a system that makes us the defendant. So if you got a white defendant and a Black victim, we have a tendency to villainize, the system has a tendency to villainize the victim. And so when you have a Black prosecutor as the voice of a Black victim who is humanizing, which shouldn't be necessary, but that's what they did. That's what Alexia and the other young ladies did. They humanized Corey in the face of that jury, and reminded the jury that the victim in this case is a Black man. Conversely, with the Trayvon Martin murder case, they did not, in the entire trial, I kept saying this, the reason they don't have anybody Black that can prepare Rachel. I understood everything that Rachel was saying. I understood where Rachel came from. I understood her distrust of the system, of white folks. I understood that they didn't have anybody Black that understood and could communicate with her and talk to her and engage her that she trusted, that could prepare her to sit on that witness stand as a key witness and testify and speak for Trayvon. And so I use those two examples to emphasize your point about how important it is for Black prosecutors, whether at the federal level or at the state level, to be on the other side of that table. Because if you are kinfolk and you have an appreciation and recognition about the holism, the whole of this system and how it was created, you still do your job. You still may ensure that people who commit crimes are put in a position where you're responsible for those actions that you took. But when the victim, it looks like us, you need someone that's going to be able to speak on behalf of that victim. And folks that don't look like us don't have our lived experience. My position is they can't do that.
Well, and it starts even before. What people need to understand, like what Ms. Ayala said, this is a process. So the Trayvon Martin case was lost at the investigation. It was lost with the police because we get the cases generally, at least as a state prosecutor, it's a little different in the federal system for me, but at the state level, we sort of got the cases already done, right? Like they're already sort of set. Those police officers who came upon that scene in Sanford, Florida, saw a dead Black boy, a kid, and a live and well Hispanic white guy, and chose to treat the dead person as the perpetrator and not the victim. So
Right.
Our cases start even before they get to us. But as an advocate for our victims, as the voice of our victims, we have to figure out where we plug in holes, if we can plug in the holes, humanizing our victims, and really being that voice that perhaps wasn't there at the beginning. But that starts with people. Not only do we have to have a diverse set of prosecutors, we need Black and brown people through every parts of all of the systems of law enforcement, from police officers to probation officers. We've got to have folks that represent the community in all of these systems so that there are people who can understand and empathize where empathy is necessary, but also advocate at every single level for these Black, brown, red, white victims, whatever they are, but to be a voice for the community and the victims.
And may I briefly jump in? Thank you for that point, Ms. Hale. And I know definitely Ms. Ayala and Ms. Rayner probably understand this as being former defense attorneys as well. It's important to have state attorneys that can have these shared experiences that come from these certain situations. I grew up in Dade City, and I've had encounters with law enforcement officers. I've had friends who've had encounters with law enforcement officers. And, we have to have prosecutors that just don't go off what a probable cause affidavit says, right? Who can scrutinize those. And I thank God all the time that sometimes I was that prosecutor who was there, who could read the probable cause affidavit and say, oh man, we know that's made up, right? And we have to have state attorneys that are willing not to just take that as a true word and gospel, right? We have to have prosecutors who are just not sitting back or reactive, but proactive when looking at these probable cause affidavits and scrutinizing them. Because oftentimes when you have case filers, some processes are different from every circuit regarding state attorney's offices. But I know here, you have your case filing, they look at that probable cause affidavit, and I could say in commonality in South Florida, they're just rubber stamping them, right? They're filing the charge, they're looking at the statute, and they're filing the case. We have to get these cases from on the front end, and that's why you have to have a diverse workforce, a diverse force that actually understands what's going on in these communities, that can over scrutinize these probable cause affidavits that are written by law enforcement officers who have no connection whatsoever with the communities that they're serving. And so that's an important aspect, being able to over scrutinize these probable cause affidavits, because then you lower the case count, right? Then you lower people of colors and poor people access or contact with the criminal justice system. And so I think that's an important function. I think that's an important aspect when dealing with trying to limit people's of colors contact with the criminal justice system as a whole.
And so, Hale, because I know, real quick, because I know we're all lawyers, and so I understand, generally speaking, what a probable cause affidavit is. There are several people watching that may not understand what that is. So can you get briefly?
Essentially, to break it down in layman's terms, it's the police report. So when a law enforcement officer comes to the scene, they draft up the report, and it's sent to us in the form of a probable cause affidavit. And they swear that everything in that probable cause affidavit or police report is true and accurate. And we're supposed to take it as the true word and gospel, and we're supposed to make our filing decisions for the most part off that. And as the crimes get a little bit more serious, then we have our own internal investigators, we coordinate, and we decide, okay, what in fact are the charges for a particular crime or incident.
Thank you. Aramis, I want to shift to you, since we're talking about probable cause affidavits and police officers. I recognize that as prosecutors, you all work very closely with law enforcement. And I'm probably going to misstate this, but I'm going to see if I remember what happened recently. So you put out a list of, and if you can't talk about it, that's fine. Just say, I can't
talk about it.
You put out and I thought this was heavy. You put out a list of law enforcement officers that, in your estimation, based on their track record, should not be used by your state attorneys when attempting to, as witnesses in whatever cases. And so I would like you to talk about why you did that, the pushback you got because of that, and what your goal was to do the 3 questions.
Aramis,
right, so
did that. Yeah. I hollered. I was like, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. So, as a prosecutor, you especially thinking, forward thinking, more progressive, trying to reform things, you get a lot of hits about, you're not for the police and you're trying to oversee the police. I've said multiple times, you're absolutely right. I do not have oversight of police. I have 100% oversight over my criminal prosecutions and the witnesses that I believe in their credibility. And the same way that we analyze people not in uniform and whether or not we should call them, whether it's because they have a criminal history, whether it's because they're going to get on the stand in the orange jumpsuit, whatever, we decide that they are credible enough to take someone's life and or liberty away. So when I looked at the history, I mean, it's all in every single prosecutor's office. You name drop one officer and everyone's just like, you taking that to trial? Like, I mean, you see Harold's reaction, like, you know that, and we continue to turn a blind eye. Who would I be to walk into office and me can make the change and turn a blind eye to a system that I know that impacts people? And it's not just Black and brown and poor people, it's anybody who's been brought in the system. So therefore, that was my way of acknowledging this truth that we all know is real. It was my way of protecting the integrity of my prosecutions. When I started the Conviction Integrity Unit, that was the back end. I had to have something on the front end of it to make sure that we weren't even having to be in the position to protect the integrity on the back end, but we will protect the integrity of the prosecution on the front end. So I made the list, and I think people are like, oh yeah, she was bold enough to release it. Florida Public Records didn't allow me not to release it. The question is whether I was going to hide behind an opportunity not to release it. And I denied and I declined that opportunity because I believe that it is up to us to make it very known and very, very clear that what we stand for. We asked earlier in the beginning, how do you gain trust? You gain trust by being honest, by being transparent, and understanding that if you have literally nothing to lose, you're not in the game.
That's good stuff. That's good stuff. Shauna, go ahead.
So to that point about sort of a Brady list, it's important for the public to recognize that whether or not it happens or not, prosecutors have an obligation under the law, under the Florida rules, under the federal rules, under Supreme Court precedent, to release any information that could be exculpatory, that could mean a defendant is not guilty, and any information related to any witness, including law enforcement, that would tend to show a bias, that would tend to show a credibility issue, anything that could damage their testimony, anything that could shed light on their credibility. We have an obligation. We are obligated under the rules to turn those things over. Now, whether or not it happens in every single case, I don't know. But what I will tell you is, at least in the federal system, we have a pretty regimented system. We have a list of questions that we ask every single law enforcement officer before we put them on the stand. We send a letter to their human resources, to their the head of the IA bureau of whatever law enforcement agency, whether it's a local law enforcement agency or a federal law enforcement agency, to see if there's anything that we are required to turn over. And quite frankly, I'll tell you this, when speaking to young folks and folks about police encounters, this is one of the reasons I encourage people that if you have a bad experience with a law enforcement officer, make a complaint. Make a complaint, because what will happen is, as a prosecutor, I will see those complaints, and perhaps it wasn't substantiated. But if there's a complaint that a person on the street said that this cop called me the N-word or used excessive force, and my case is about sort of those issues, even if it's not substantiated, that's something that I probably have to turn over. That's something that is discoverable. And so at certain points, when you have enough of these complaints as a prosecutor, kind of like what Ms. Ayala is saying here, I can't use you. And so what benefit are you to your agency, your law enforcement agency, if you can't testify, if you can't collect evidence? What's the purpose of you doing your job when you can't do the foundational things that go along with your job? So we have an obligation. Those prosecutors who are doing the right thing should be turning over that information. That notwithstanding, a list like what Ms. Ayala proposed and distributed, I think, is very important for the community to see that we're doing what we should be doing, what we're supposed to be doing, and highlighting these issues with law enforcement.
Let me just add too that not only did we just reveal it, now we're getting messages from the community who like, oh, you didn't include this person, which triggers additional information, and it's how we begin to work together.
Yeah. So let me ask this question because I think that Aramis, your position, even though you were, as Shauna said, you're required to do that anyway, but I would suggest or represent that It probably is not happening. We got about 3 minutes, so we may not get this answer in, but we're gonna do this again because there's so much more I have. But it seems that anytime a Black prosecutor, because I did some research, there are 2,400 elected prosecutors in this country. That includes district attorneys, state attorneys, county prosecutors, solicitor generals, AGs. I think AGs included that too. Of that 2,400, 1.34% of those elected prosecutors are Black women. And I would venture to say, because I tried to do the research for Black male prosecutors, these are elected positions. So these are the top elected prosecutors in their respective jurisdictions. I would venture to say that the number of Black men is about the same. Y'all are a part of the 1%, right? And so that 1%, and before I was going to have this conversation about the intersection between race and gender and how Black women seem to be more, because we've already talked about the fact that prosecutors get to use their discretion. Michele said it. You all are the most powerful people in the courtroom. You all get to use your discretion in terms of what's going to get charged, the level, whatever it is, you have ultimate discretion within the confines of the law. But it seems to me that when you use your discretion, Aramis, specifically with respect to you, when you decided that you were not going to pursue the death penalty, when you made a decision, even though it's following the law with respect to releasing the names of police officers, Marilyn Mosby who's the DA in Baltimore, phenomenal, Baltimore County, got ripped when she made the decision that she was going to prosecute those cops that murdered Freddie Gray. Kim Foxx in Cook County in Chicago.
Rachel Rollins in Boston, Kim Gardner in St. Louis. Yes.
So you have this list of black prosecutors, more specifically Black female prosecutors, but Black prosecutors who, when they use their discretion, which they are obligated to do, they seem to get challenged and questioned, not just on a local level, but you got someone in DC that feels compelled to intercede and intervene in local situations. And so we're not going to have enough time in the last 3 minutes, but I would like to get, because Harold is coming new into this space, Aramis, and you've been there, you've experienced this. And so provide your response to my question, which I guess I asked, and at the same time provide guidance to Harold in terms of what he's about to encounter.
Well, the goalpost changes, right? When the face of the prosecutor changes, the level of discretion has changed. If you look at the history of this country with prosecutors, all of the research, law review articles, everything has talked about the unfettered discretion that prosecutors have. When the face changed, then they began to change what discretion actually looked like, and it diminished. The fact that I had the governor, not just in death penalty, take away a case, I'm like, we don't have enough evidence. He took it away. They actually didn't. That's a whole other story. Kim decided not to charge Jesse Smollett or take it through diversion. We do that every day. They didn't like the way that looked. So the bottom line is that it will change. So I tell everybody, you got to stay clean. You got to stay by the book and let them argue you in court, because thing that in my 4 years here, again, nobody can touch my level of integrity, my level of intellect, or anything. They will go after it, but I don't have any room for error because I'm trying to make change, and anything that I do personally is a distraction to the movement.
I am so thankful for the four of you all. This has been a phenomenal conversation. I want y'all back whenever we figure out a time and space to do this again. Harold, congratulations. Best of luck in your race in November. We are just super excited. This was a blessing. And for everybody watching, thank you so much. I handled this by myself. It was intense, but I handled it by myself. So I'm excited.
You did good.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you all gathered and gained some insight and empowered by this conversation. Make sure you follow us on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, Soul Purpose Show, and we will see y'all next Saturday. Tune in at 12:30 because we're unraveling the DNC convention. But y'all be blessed. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, take care.